Hey, 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 happy Tuesday. Come on in, pull up a chair. The Gaming Gang Dispatch is in the air. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Welcome to the Dispatch tonight. It is Tuesday, May 28th, 2024. This is live show number 1061. If you're not overly familiar with this show, let me point out, super casual around here. We just hang out talking about the latest in tabletop gaming news. We started talking about what the website is. We just hang out having fun, talking about the latest in tabletop gaming news, and then I will usually pontificate on a topic that has to do with our hobby, which I will be tonight. But of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the ready for it, latest tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Also, because this is a live show, there is chat available. It's not on screen. It's one of the ways I keep some of the more unusual commenters at bay. And you must be a subscriber to the channel for at least an hour before you can take part in chat. Another way I keep some of the more unusual commenters at bay. But if you want to say howdy, maybe you got a question, comment, by all means, chime in and I will do my best to respond. So let's see. First out the gate tonight is our friend of the show, the Madman, coming to us from the Motor City. Good to see you. Semper Buffo's here, as is Roger Perdome, Kathy Evans, and Lenny Blade, as well as Chris Lundgren, who jumped the gun in chat again. Anyway, hopefully everybody's doing pretty well tonight. So after the tabletop gaming news of the evening and what just dropped into my eye. All right. I don't think it's on my contact lens. That would not be fun. Anyway, tonight, after we tackle the tabletop gaming news of the day, which we've got quite a bit, and some big news pieces as well, I am going to share 10 fantasy authors that I truly feel that game masters, dungeon masters, both old and new, and regardless of what you run, as long as you're running some sort of a fantasy role-playing game, I think that these authors and their works will inspire your gaming. So stay tuned for that. James Venabush is joining us in chat tonight as well. I'll take a guess that our chat will probably be a bit quieter than usual because I don't have a topic tonight where people are like, oh, Jeff's going to get all worked up about something. Which the reality is, I never actually get that worked up over things. So, Jim Venabush says, sounds like a good topic tonight. Chris Lundgren had mentioned that prior to the show beginning in chat. Buddy, go peck Chris. Pet Chris, tell him, hey. Well, actually, you can't tell him because you can't speak. But tell him to, wait till the show starts. Wait till that first little blurb pops out. Because what happens is when you do that, I already have my intro, like, hi, everybody, happy Tuesday, typed up. But when you comment before the stream begins, it makes it disappear. So I have to go and put it back in there. Now I do copy and paste it now, so it's a lot faster. But there were times it was like, shit, I got to rewrite all that real quick. It's a minute after the hour, damn it. Anywho, let's jump on into the news because there are a couple of big Kickstarters that launched today. And let's talk about the first because our friends over at Modiphius Entertainment launched their crowdfunding project for the Cohors Cthulhu Tactics Adventure War Game. Here's what I know. Summon heroes from across the Roman Empire to fight alone or with allies against the eldritch forces of the outer gods. Carve your way through the mist-shrouded Germanic forests, encountering strange ruins and monstrous enemies at every turn. Can your heroes keep your soldiers together against the unfathomable hordes? Or will their sanity shatter as quickly as their ranks? Your enemy, the malevolent outer god Mendaxius, something that's being made up for this game, will match your wits of the mightiest heroes and the size of your legions, ensuring you always face a vile and relentless foe. Are you motivated by love, glory, honor, or power? Will you stay and face insurmountable odds or retreat to fight another day? Every decision is in your hands, and each one will have repercussions, for good or ill. Follow a branching story of your heroes from a ragtag band of desperate survivors to the charismatic leaders of a powerful Roman legion and its allies. Cohors Cthulhu Tactics is a brand new horror-themed adventure set in the Cohors Cthulhu universe during the height of Imperial Rome. Of course, we know that is on the horizon. The role-playing game is supposed to be a Gen Con release. You begin your heroic journey as one of a handful of survivors of an ambush, desperately trying to escape the mythos-ridden mists of a Germanic forest. Played solo or cooperatively, the game fuses the strategic nuance of tabletop war games with the immersive narrative of role-playing games. Cohors Cthulhu Tactics has been designed by Modiphius CCO Chris Birch, with development by James Hewitt, Sophie Williams, and the Modiphius development team, based on the original concepts in Clash of Spears by Alvaro and Francisco Irizi. My apologies, I probably mispronounced those names, or that last name, I should say. The miniatures range features Roman centurions, scoundrels. Scoundrel, I like the sound of that word. Nobles, hunters, priests, druids, assassins, soldiers, and warriors. More than enough for you to choose the right characters for your heroic journey and lead your forces to victory over your eldritch enemies. Facing them will be the full might of the outer gods, the cult of Mormo with their priests, servitors, ghouls, and overlords of Mormo. Toyful hounds, fluttering fiends, she-had, don't know what that is, elder things, chosen, and die Dragur. Finally, the outer gods turn their vast intellects to defeating the plans of the heroes, sending their devastating avatars to the battlefields. There is a short video. It's about a minute, 40 seconds, thereabouts. It's going to give you a much closer look at these minis. So let's take a peek.
Cohors Cthulhu Tactics, solo and co-op adventure wargaming in the Roman Empire. summon heroes from across the Roman Empire to fight eldritch forces of the outer gods. Carve your way through the mist-shrouded Germanic forests, encountering strange ruins and monstrous enemies at every turn. Can your heroes keep your soldiers together against the unfathomable hordes, or will their sanity shatter as quickly as their ranks? Your enemy, the malevolent altar god Mendasius, will match the weights of your mightiest heroes and the size of your legions, ensuring you always face a vile and relentless foe. Are you motivated by love, glory, honor, or power? Will you stay and face unsurmountable odds, or retreat to fight another day? Every decision is in your hands, and each one will have repercussions, for good or for ill.
You can jump aboard the Cohorts Cthulhu Tactics Kickstarter for a pledge of approximately $77, which will reserve the core rulebook and the miniatures needed to play the prologue and first act. Or you can go all in to get absolutely everything needed for the 3-act campaign, including all unlocked miniatures, which are starting at 97, as well as 57 STLs. And I know there are some minis which are stretch goals. They will be part of this. That pledge is approximately, wait for it, $577. Although if you think about it, there are 97 miniatures, and some of them are pretty large. In fact, the Avatar of Cthulhu, which is the next miniature you're going to get a view of, looks to be probably 3 to 4 times the size of a standard figure. So like a Legionnaire or something like that. So pretty wild. Pretty wild. Now, this does run through June 30th. Expected delivery is next March. Very nice. Very nice. I am curious about the Cohorts Cthulhu role-playing game, because I do understand that it is in the same universe as Achtung Cthulhu. So I am kind of curious about that. If they're going to drop any references or anything along those lines. Kind of curious. All right, we got quite a few people popped into chat while I was covering that news story. We've got Jack Hanks, Sean O'Donnell, Russell Higgins, Lord Cost 2000, and Flaming Heron are with us tonight. I would take a wild guess. We probably have the lovely and talented Miss Sarah D hanging out in the shadows, keeping an eye out, keeping people in line, using her telepathy. I don't know, I'm feeling silly tonight. I don't know what to tell you. So Sean O'Donnell says, not seeing the Great Primed Legion in there anywhere. Oh, wait, there they are. Yeah, if you happen to be visiting the Kickstarter, and of course, I will have a news piece in the wee hours of the morning for this, so you can follow those links if you want to do that. There's this one image that's showing what you get for the $577, and it's like, holy cow. It's a lot of stuff. But then again, it is $577. Yowza. Sarah D says, indeed, she is hiding out tonight. Mike is with us tonight. Good to see you. Chris Lundgren says, I really like the Misplaced Legion novel series by Harry Turtledove. Hey, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. The Legion was far from Caesar's Gaul and Rome, banished to a world of magic and dark sorcery. It's a cool idea for an RPG. Yeah, I used to read Harry Turtledove. I read his, what do they call it? Colonization series, strangely enough. But it's the alien invasion during World War II. Or no, it's World in the Balance. I think that's what they call that series. And then he did an alternate Civil War series that started with Guns of the South, in which these apartheid South Africans go back in time and provide the Confederacy with like AK-47s. Although, strangely enough, his alternate Civil War series kind of breaks off from that as if that never happened. I used to like Harry Turtledove, and then it got to the point he just released too much stuff, and it was kind of like, I didn't find the books as, I don't know, engaging as they had been. Russell Higgins says that's ludicrous. A, who can afford that? B, if you can afford that, how close to someone else can you afford that you are really? Give me the rules for $75 and the STLs. I believe that is I think that is a pledge level. I think. Sean O'Donnell says Battletech Kickstarters are big like that too. Says one of the last ones, they went in on the last one for over $100. It's going to be like 50 mechs. I would assume that's just the STLs. So Kevin R. Smith is with us tonight. Good to see you. Says Guns of the South was a whole separate continuity from his other Civil War series, which just had one battle turn out differently and send everything off course. Yeah, it gets to the point in that series, and I'm sure Kevin will correct me if I'm wrong, because I didn't get this far. I kind of, jumped off the train by this point. But it gets to the point where World War I rolls around, and the Union is allied with the Kaiser. It's like, oh, okay. All right. It's like, yeah, okie doke. I have to say, I've got an issue with the Lost Cause. I really do. So I have problems with like alternate histories where it's like, oh, well, we weren't really fighting for slavery. We were fighting for states' rights. It's like, bullshit. You were not fighting for states' rights. And of course, most of the Confederate soldiers owned no slaves. That's where we start getting into that rich man's war, poor man's fight. Saw that on the Union side too, when you'd be able, if you were drafted, you could pay to have someone replace you. So, Chris Lundgren's pointing out Rally Cry. I've read some of those, although I find the author is actually problematic, so I stopped reading his stuff. But yeah, that's a pretty interesting series. All right, moving right along. We're not getting into the talk about books yet. Arriving in print and PDF, or I should say already arrived in print and PDF from Modiphius. I should say Mongoose Publishing. See, I've got Modiphius on the brain because it's flashing in front of my eyes right now. Anywho, right now you can get Traveler, the Fifth Frontier War, Flashpoints. Here's the scoop. Udaland, bleak, miserable Udaland. Amid a disaster aboard a giant mining machine, the travelers start asking themselves, why would they come here? Why would they take such a dangerous and underpaid job? And why their memories are suddenly disjointed. As the Zidani occupation of Udaland begins, the travelers realize they are not who they thought they were. The answers lie in a spacecraft in the Utaland system. But to reach it, they will have to go through the Zudani occupation force. Reaching the ship, the travelers learn why they were hiding on Utaland and where they must go next. More importantly, they unravel what they've done. The Fifth Frontier War is unfolding around them, and there is a good chance that they had a hand in starting it. This 136-page hardcover with PDF is out right now. It carries an MSRP of $49.99. You can grab just the PDF alone over at Drive-Thru RPG for $29.99. So the Fifth Frontier War has kicked off. That is kind of that new storyline that is going to be rolling on out. I'm kind of curious if Mongoose is going to kind of stick to this, I don't want to call it an adventure path, but this campaign, because Mongoose Publishing tends to release something for one campaign, and then something else comes out, and then something else comes out, something else comes out, and they're all for different campaigns. And then they kick off campaigns. But I guess this is the big storyline for Traveler, is the Fifth Frontier War. So it is out. And once again, you can get it in print and PDF. And Russell Higgins has just popped out a super chat for $50. Thank you very much, Russell. Much appreciated. Big tip of the cap. In fact, I'll doff my cap? Remember I had mentioned that there were two big Kickstarters which launched today? Well, the Kickstarter for Blade Runner Replicant Rebellion, it kicked off, and it funded in, I believe it was 12 minutes. Here's the latest from Free League Publishing. Blade Runner, the role-playing game, Replicant Rebellion has arrived. This book massively expands the scope of the critically acclaimed tabletop role-playing game, recruiting players to join the ranks of the Replicant Underground in Los Angeles 2037. Set at the same time and place as the core rulebook, players explore this neon noir cityscape from the opposite perspective, now running from Blade Runners in an evocative cat and mouse race of provocateurs and powder kegs lit to explode, expose, and oppose the establishment one way or another. For the rebellion, players will run their own independent crew who must undertake a variety of operations, all while attempting to maintain their cover and keep their records clean. Are they helping fugitive replicants evade capture, sabotaging the replicant trade, grappling with the cops, courts, and megacorps, clashing with warring crews and syndicates, smoking out moles in your midst? In this big city of dazzling lights and moral contradictions, Replicant Rebellion flips the famous script of the beloved Blade Runner universe and dares you to explore how much you're willing to lose for a cause that's sacrificing it all. Yet, regardless the price, the rebellion must live on. This Kickstarter campaign also offers an asset pack, which is available for both the Replicant Rebellion and the core game, or I guess I should say is usable for both Replicant Rebellion and the core game. The asset pack includes a host of physical and digital handouts and tools for the game runner to create their own case files and operations. As I mentioned, this project funded in its first 12 minutes, and you can reserve a copy of the hardcover with PDF for a pledge of approximately $38, once again, exchange rate, through June 13th. Expected delivery is next February. That asset pack is also part of this Kickstarter. As I mentioned, you can reserve a copy of that for a pledge of approximately $38 as well. Now, you can score both for a pledge of approximately $66, so you can save a little bit of money there if you pledge for both of them. These are the physical copies with PDFs. Now, you can get the digital bundle for a pledge of approximately, you guessed it, $38. There's the theme here, $38. I want my $38. I know it's two, but with inflation, it's that movie's old. Very nice. Very nice. I know a lot of people are very, very excited about this Kickstarter. Now, you may have caught my recent review of Fiery Angels, which I thought was okay. I recommended it, but I thought it was a letdown compared to the previous releases for Blade Runner, which I thought just knocked it out of the park. I'm really interested in this because the reality is, I think as a member of the Replicant Rebellion, you're going to have a whole lot more things that you can do as opposed to being a Blade Runner. I mean, you're a Blade Runner, you're a cop. That's kind of the scheme of things. Here opens up a whole new world of things to do. And you're not necessarily a replicant. You could be playing a human helping the replicants. So that's a possibility too. Really excited about this. This looks very, very cool. I do believe it's going to clock in around 200 pages. That's kind of the rumor I heard. I don't know if that is exactly going to be the fact or not. Tessie Trekkies with us says 12 minutes. Yes, I backed 3 minutes after it launched, and I'm annoyed I was so late. Flaming Heron has backed it. Russell Higgins pointed out that they liked that cover and the graphics for the Traveler release. That is one thing that we normally do see from Mongoose Publishing is good-looking layout. Now, sometimes the proofreading's not up to snuff, but the books always look good. Mammoth said they jumped all over that Blade Runner Kickstarter as soon as they were notified it was active. Tessie Trekkie says asset packs can be awesome. They got the one for Cyborg, which includes a pad of around 200 tearaway maps of like 60 different cyberpunk locations. Yes, I received that from Free League Publishing too, and I thought that was really nicely done, that asset pack, because it wasn't just the pad of locations. There was other stuff involved with it as well. So there you have it. The two big Kickstarters that launched today. Moving right along, there is a new bundle of Holding, which has arrived. It features the latest from Runehammer Games. And I've got the deets on this Crown and Skull deal. Adventure! This all-new Runehammer Crown and Skull bundle presents, you guessed it, Crown and Skull, the newest tabletop fantasy role-playing rule system from index card RPG designer Brandish Runehammer Gillum at Runehammer Games. I thought he preferred being referred to as hankering for an ale. I don't know. I've never met him. He looks like he would snap me in half if he wanted to. Crown and Skull puts the players at center stage. Players can build their own custom equipment and spells, roll all the dice in combat, and discover new setting locations, inhabitants, and events. And the Game Master is right at the player's side, discovering all this with them and using the game's inventive no-prep tools to improvise legendary adventures across the North Holds. Characters earn hero points in play and grow their own way, eventually making the fateful choice: Crown, service to the kingdom, or Skull, independent destiny. For just $7.95, you get the complete Crown and Skull digital bundle, which is actually sold over on the Runehammer Games website for $30, with the 356-page DRM-free Crown and Skull core rulebook, the Northhold setting map in a hex grid and no grid versions, 30 image tokens suitable for virtual tabletop platforms, and 23 atmospheric MP3 music tracks to enhance your game sessions. That is it. That is the bundle. And these savings run through June 17th. I don't know much about history. Don't know much about geography. Actually, I don't know much about Crown and Skull outside of the fact it's got some excellent designer DNA. And there are no attributes. So there is that. So you don't worry about any attributes for the player characters. And the artwork looks really cool. It really does. So kind of, you know, I'm tempted. I am tempted. I would prefer to actually have a physical book, but I really liked an X-Card role-playing game. I thought it was fantastic for a particular style of gameplay. So if you're sitting there going, oh, hey, I want an OSR game. Well, no, you're not going to grab Index Card RPG. But if you're looking for something where it's like, hey, you know, I want to introduce people to role-playing games, not have to spend 4 hours explaining how all of this works, you know, and making it very easy on both the players, plural, hopefully, and the game master, yeah. Index Card role-playing game is pretty sweet, but this is now the focus of Runehammer Games. I believe Crown and Skull and Easy D6, which is from DM Scotty. I think those are the two lines that Runehammer Games is investing in, I guess I will say. But this looks pretty sweet, pretty sweet. So there you have it, $7.95. You can get some pretty good savings on that because the bundle normally sells for $30. Now, I will mention, in case you may have misunderstood, it includes tokens for a virtual tabletop. It does not include this as a virtual tabletop game. So if there is a Foundry or Roll20 or anything like that for Crown and Skull that is out there, that is not part of this bundle. Let's see. Russell Hean says about biology. Yes, I don't know why that popped into my head. Semper Buffo says they were thinking of buying the Blade Runner role-playing game. This seems like the time to jump in. I do have a video review if you're kind of curious about it. Check it out. I go into a bit of detail. So see if it might be up your alley. Now, keeping in mind that everything that's been released to this point for Blade Runner is aimed at the players are Blade Runners. So there is nothing where it's like, oh, well, I make eyes. No, none of that. None of that. Vladimir Hens says not hating the line drawing. Well, I'm glad you don't hate it. I think it's pretty good. Sharon says line drawings never catch a break. All right, final news piece of the evening. Warhammer 40K, Wrath and Glory, Eldari, Inheritance of Embers is now available for pre-order. Here's the skinny from my friends over at Cubicle 7 Games. Like their shattered war god, Kayla Mensha Khan. I know I just mispronounced that, but what can I tell you? They changed Eldar to Eldari, so, you know. The ancient Eldari are a sundered people, heirs to a galaxy-wide empire that succumbed to ruination. All Eldari fear the grip of she who thirsts. Each has been forced to find their own way to deal with this looming horror. Some have chosen to walk a narrow path of focus and dedication, while others feed her insatiable hunger with the suffering and pain of their victims. Eldari, Inheritance of Embers, is the ultimate Wrath and Glory sourcebook for Eldari players and game masters alike. This expansive supplement is the perfect starting point for an entirely Eldari-focused adventure or to expand the enigmatic Xeno's role in an existing campaign. Explore the shattered ruins of craft world Ulkari, raid unwary void ships as daring corsairs, or even risk navigating the intricate and brutal politics of Komora itself. Eldari Inheritance of Embers is packed with details on all 4 of the major Eldari factions: the Asolyani, Corsairs, Harlequins, and Drukhari. Explore the history of the Eldari from their ancient galaxy-spanning empire to the comparative handful of survivors who subsist in the embers of what remains. There are dozens of new archetypes of every tier, featuring iconic troop types from all 4 factions, detailed frameworks and advice for running Eldari-focused games, elegant and deadly Eldari equipment, weapons, and armor, detailed NPC profiles to be used as patrons or nemeses in games of Wrath and Glory revolving around the Eldari presence in the Gilead system. This 160-page hardcover with PDF can be pre-ordered right now from Cubicle 7 Games for $44.99. You can grab just the PDF alone right now over at DriveThruRPG for $19.99. Of course, if you pre-order this from Cubicle 7, you will receive the PDF pretty much immediately. So you will get that right away. And the physical book is slated for a summer release. So it is a Q3 release. I do not have an exact month available for that. Very nice. Good to see that Cubicle 7 Games is continuing to support Wrath and Glory, because when their latest Warhammer 40K role-playing game came out, a lot of people thought, well, that's the end of Wrath and Glory. But they're really different. Really different. Hell, but now I can't speak English. They're very different. I will have a news piece about the other Cubicle 7 Games Warhammer 40K role-playing game on tomorrow's show. All right, that is it for the news tonight. Of course, I was just talking about DriveThruRPG. Don't forget the Gaming Gang, thus the Dispatch, is affiliated with the One Bookshelf sites. So if you are going to visit DriveThruRPG, by all means, please stop by thegaminggang.com first. Click on one of our banner ads. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get 5% of that sale. And that goes for other websites as well, such as Wargame Vault, Dungeon Masters Guild, Storytellers Vault, what have you. If it is a One Bookshelf site, if you're going to visit, stop by thegaminggang.com first and click on one of our banners. Much appreciated. And of course, if you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. If you like this video, if you dig the channel, if you find thegaminggang.com to be a valuable resource, hell, if you just like what we do, you can always stop on by paypal.me/thegaminggang to make a small donation. Hell, you can buy me a 2-liter bottle of soda. Lip smacking good. And of course, there are some folks out there who stop by paypal.me/thegaminggang and make not small donations. So thank you very kindly to Joshua Edwards. The Madman's always popping on in there, as is Agile Monk, to name just a few very recent people who popped in there. So, of course, I really do thank every one of you who uses the banner ads and or visits paypal.me. Really keeping us around. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. So James Venebush says, it's time for intermission. Wonder what the movie ad will be. Well, if you're going to be that way, maybe I just won't do one. 245 Trioxin is with us tonight. Good to see you. Welcome aboard. So this evening, I am going to share 10 fantasy authors that I think that if you're a game master, a dungeon master, take a peek at their work, because it is certainly going to inspire your gameplay around your table and get those creative juices flowing. But before I do that, I think it's time for a brief intermission. After that pops up, I always forget to hit that. Dope.
Moose! Critters now have orange moose. Moose! Sweetest moose we could produce. Call for orange moose.
Sweet moose, the color of orange, now inside the box with the other sugary animals.
Call for orange moose.
Yes, it's Post-Crispy Critters. The one and only cereal that comes in the shape of animals.
Including orange moose.
Post cereals make breakfast a little bit better.
For Wilkins coffee, you pull this handle.
If I don't want it,
Then I pull this handle. It pays to drink Wilkins.
Science has learned that all people possess mental powers which pass the boundaries of the natural. This is the story of a man confronted by such strange forces within himself. At this moment, he is looking at a thing of evil, a thing that takes possession of the mind and compels it to kill.
I destroyed them. Something in me killed them.
Seven pins went in. And the 7 people died, not 1, 7. Who put in those pins? You did, all 7. Maps and pins can't kill alone. The power of a human brain has to be behind them.
You're right. We are so lucky. So lucky to be alive.
A terror spawned in the hellish unknown, seeking warm, living flesh to drag down into the bowels of the earth.
I don't know. Now I'm interested in checking out that movie. I'm trying to remember if I've actually seen that. I bury the living. Fleming Huron says, I bury my career. Chris Burkhardt is with us. Richard Boone of Have Gun Will Travel fame? Yes, it's Paladin. In fact, I think that was what they were probably going for as far as, hey, come see this movie because Paladin's in it. You watch them on TV. Come on, check it out. Kevin R. Smith also points out Orange Moose, any resemblance to Bullwinkle is entirely coincidental. Moose and Squill. Yes. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about 10 fantasy authors, which I personally feel, if you are a game master, if you're a dungeon master, it doesn't matter if you're brand new to running role-playing games or if you've been doing it for decades, I think if you read these authors, you can really gain a lot of inspiration from them. And of course, their works are kind of aimed at different kinds of fantasy role-playing games. We will talk about that a little bit as well. Cracks the Bold is with us this evening. Good to see you once again, Cracks. Says Amazon has I Buried the Living, and it's free. If you have Amazon Plus, the wife will be thrilled. Don't blame me, okay? I just shared a trailer for it as a lark. So, yeah, Jeff, my wife wants to kill you now because she hated I Buried the Living, and you made us watch it, you bastard. Game Master's Hobby is popping on into chat too. All right, so of course, as I talk about these various different authors, by all means, in chat, float out some of your favorites. You know, if you want to share why, you know, you love their work, that's great. If you are watching this on Memorex, you know, that means after the fact, not live. Share a comment in the comment section. Let me know who your favorite fantasy authors are, because there are loads of authors out there that do great work that are not going to be in this list. And there were actually a few that I had considered including, one especially, and I thought, his work is way too problematic now for me to include him. And interestingly enough, I read some of his books, but my best friend Elliot Miller was a massive fan of him. In fact, his Call of Cthulhu character for years was actually this author's name transposed. And this author was mentioned earlier in chat before we jumped on into the news. Tessie Trekkie says Raymond E. Feist, Terry Pratchett, Jenny Wirtz, Frank Herbert, Tolkien, and C.S. Lewis. Okay, so remember, we are talking fantasy here. And yes, I know Frank Herbert did some fantasy. I'm just pointing out it is fantasy. So Tessie Trekkie says, I bet it's the Tikummel, or Tikummel, however it's pronounced, professor. No, Mars Barker wouldn't be on this list. James Venenbush says Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman and H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft didn't write fantasy, though. Now, of course, there are some authors out there that may have thrown out a fantasy story here or there. They don't make the list either. So these are authors that kind of stuck, or still do, not all of them are deceased, in the fantasy genre. Maddie C. is with us in chat. Says their buddy loves Robin Hobb. Flaming Heart says, you mean Cthulhu is real? Yeah, he's even in Dungeon Crawl Classics. Come on. Roger Perdome says their classic 10, no particular order. David Ennings, Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, J.R.R. Tolkien, Terry Brooks, Robert Aspirin, R.A. Salvador, Raymond E. Feist, Guy Gavriel, I think that's how it's pronounced, Guy Gavriel K., Fritz Leiber, and Ursula K. Le Guin. I've heard people pronounce it Le Guin, but that is not right. It is Le Guin. I'm sure somebody will comment, "You're wrong, Jeff." I don't know. I'm just going by the person, the author themselves, pronouncing their name. All right, so number 1, Robert E. Howard. You can't talk fantasy role-playing games without discussing Robert E. Howard. Now, of course, if you are aiming towards a swords and sorcery feel, then yes. And I will point out that Howard's depiction of people who are not pasty white wasps is a little troubling, but there are actually a lot of fantasy stories that he did. And a lot of people think, oh, it's only Conan. But no, there's loads more. You've got Cull, you've got Bran MacMoor, and even Solomon Kane. And Solomon Kane is a Puritan, and he is, I want to say it's supposed to be 17th, 18th century, thereabouts. But strangely enough, there's more sorcery going on in some of those Solomon Kane stories than in Conan. So there's that. Shauna Dowdle says, obligatory, you're wrong, Jeff. There you go. Thank you. You're wrong, Jeff. It's not pronounced the. It's the. Dumbass. Daryl Errett is with us. I probably mispronounced that name. But Daryl does pop in from time to time. Good to see you once again. So here we go. Some people throwing out some stories here. Red Nails, Scarlet Citadel, Queen of the Black Coast. Red Nails, if I remember correctly, I think that is the final Conan story, isn't it? Because before Robert E. Howard committed suicide, he was writing predominantly Westerns, if I remember correctly. But yes, I think Red Nails was the final Conan story that either he wrote or that was published in Weird Tales. And weirdly enough, Red Nails is inspired by his own relationship with, I can't remember the woman's first name. Is it Emily Price? Yes. Who he was in a relationship with and did not realize that she did not think that the relationship was an exclusive thing. So she was also in a relationship with one of his best friends, and he found out about it on a trip to New Mexico for like a week with his good friend. I'd like to be sitting there spending a week vacationing with somebody who's like, wait a second. We're talking about my girlfriend? Huh? Orbo Bite is with us tonight. Kevin R. Smith says, supposedly, one of the Conan stories where he's trapped in a dungeon was a huge inspiration for Dave Arneson's Blackmoor campaign. Cool. Very cool. So we have Robert E. Howard once again. Yes. Some of his stuff can be problematic. I know I've used that word a little too much tonight, which is problematic. But once again, yeah, okay. So just like people get mad at me when I talk about, okay, so H.P. Lovecraft was racist. I mean, he was really racist. Now, it is possible his worldview changed as he got older, because it certainly seems that way. And Robert E. Howard was racist. They grew up in Texas, and that's where he spent his life. He didn't go like live in New York City or anything like that. He lived in middle of nowhere, Texas. And he was relatively racist. Like I always point out, you must really be racist when a racist calls you out on being racist, which is what Howard did to Lovecraft. So, Kevin R. Smith says, you mean stuff written in the 1930s might have things we find objectionable these days? I'm shocked. See, that is my big point, is that we have to judge things by the time that they took place or were created or what have you. So people don't look at the Mona Lisa and say, oh, gee, what a piece of shit this is because it didn't use these sorts of oils, which are available now, which are just beautiful and really stand out. Oh, no. So, there, like I said, there are going to be some authors on this list that people will probably have some issues with. But Vorpal Bite says racist doesn't mean anything anymore. It's overused. Flaming Heron says product of his time. Yes. Product of his time and place. Let's talk about a modern author. Next up, I absolutely love Joe Abercrombie stuff. Definitely do. I should point out, as far as I understand, each of the authors that I'm going to talk about, they have plenty of audiobooks available and they are very well done. And the First Lost series, the standalone books with the short stories, not all of them are short stories. Some are just standalone novels, as well as his follow-up trilogy. The narrator to those is phenomenal. He is excellent. And some of the best audiobook experiences that I've had are listening to the Joe Abercrombie books. Now, I will point out that this is pretty light as far as magic. So this would be more along the lines of a magic light fantasy world. There aren't a ton of like monsters. So we're not talking about Dungeons and Dragons, epic fantasy by any stretch of the imagination. But what I love about Joe Abercrombie is his characters stand out. And I should also point out that he does drop F-bombs and things like that. And there is sex. So just be aware of that. But he takes some well-used fantasy tropes and pretty much turns them on their heads. And absolutely love it. Joe Abercrombie is not going to be everybody's thing. But I'll tell you one thing that Joe Abercrombie does really well, too, is he writes combat and conflict better than most fantasy authors out there. So if you have not checked out the First Lost series, certainly recommend that. And who just threw out, oh, there we go, Chris Burkhardt, The Blade Itself. That is the first book. Check it out. I highly recommend the audiobooks. It's all the same narrator too, which is always a nice thing. So by all means, give Joe Abercrombie a peek. And he is a modern author. So you don't have to kind of, make your way through the language like you're going to have to with my next author, who is Clark Ashton Smith. And that is somebody that probably has not gotten the credit they deserve as far as both fantasy and science fiction, because he was one of the big three when it came to Weird Tales and other pulp magazines, but mainly Weird Tales. And it was Howard Lovecraft Smith. And strangely enough, Clark Ashton Smith stopped writing fiction after Howard had committed suicide. Lovecraft had died from cancer. His mother had died the same year as Lovecraft, if I remember right. And then his father passed away, I think, at 37, 38. And all of that just happening in such a short space of time just drove him out of writing any fiction ever again. He turned to sculpting and poetry, although he had written poetry in the past as well. But Clark Ashton Smith has tons of stories out there. In fact, talking about audiobooks, they have over on Audible, at least in the US, because I know they have different offerings based on country, region, which is weird. I understand the television aspect of that. Audiobooks, not so much. But it's a 5-volume set. I don't know if it's all of his stories or not. All of his like fantasy and science fiction. But they're actually really well done, and they use a variety of voice actors throughout each of the volumes. But you'll find loads of fantasy in the mix. So Clark Ashton Smith also writes stories which take place in Hyperborea. So in the same age as Conan, sharing kind of a common universe. There's, I think it's, if I remember right, it's called Poseidonus, which is supposed to be Atlantis. Aveyron, which is kind of a fantasy France. And then there is Zothique. I'm trying to remember how it's pronounced. But that is similar to Jack Vance's Dying Earth. So kind of, it's supposed to be like millions of years in the future. But the funny thing is, as far as Clark Ashton Smith's stories, especially his later stories, they feel more modern. They feel more modern than, say, Robert E. Howard or H.P. Lovecraft, even though they were written 32, 33, 34-ish. And Clark Ashton Smith was a very prolific author. Yes, he was. He had a very prolific author. He was a very prolific author. And quite a lot of stuff out there. Not a lot of issues. Looking at his stories now, and now I can't say that there isn't anything that ever pops up, but there isn't anything that I remember that I thought, ooh, what the hell? Wait a second here. Flaming Aaron says, are we sure that's soda? Yes, it is. It is. Kevin R. Smith asked, didn't Clark Ashton Smith do a lot of expanding of the Cthulhu mythos? I don't want to say a lot. He does have some stories that do have like a mythos flavor to them. Usually, a lot of his stories, see, because there's so many of them. One thing about Clark Ashton Smith, some of his detractors will say, is that he would use a paragraph or a sentence would work. And in some ways, yeah, that's true. He is a little long-winded, but not his writing isn't as flowery as some you would see from the 30s. But a lot of his stories tend to be somebody who's got a really big ego being cut down to size or worse by the universe at large or science or something. That tends to be a theme that runs through a good number of his stories. Some of them are just really cool science fiction stories and fantasy stories. And he doesn't necessarily have his own kind of mythos. Kevin R. Smith says, I guess he figured he got paid by the word. Yeah, seeing that they did. James Venebush says they really like Edward W. Robertson's Cycle of Arwen. Unique magic system and great character development. It is available on audiobook. Very nice. Very cool. Once again, as I mentioned, if there are some authors out there that you don't think people are very familiar with, Like, as an example, Edward W. Robinson. James, do me a favor, put that in the comment section, because I would love for those of you who watch this or watching it now, share some of your favorites, because I don't know about you, but I'm always on the lookout for some new fantasy to be reading. Okay, next up, we already mentioned the mispronunciation or correct pronunciation, Ursula K. Le Guin. Her Earthsea books are fantastic. They are really, really well done. Once again, unique kind of magic. I know they do sort of skew a little science fantasy in some ways, but I would say that Ursula K. Le Guin is probably the most important female fantasy writer ever. Anne McCaffrey probably comes close. But the reality is, I haven't really read any like Dragon Riders of Pern. I think I started reading the first book years and years ago, and it just didn't click with me. So something else you want to keep in mind, these authors that I'm recommending, I have read their work. So it's not as if it's like, oh, well, I've heard of this person, I'm going to float that name out there. So I'm sure there's loads of authors like Raymond E. Feist. I think I've only read one of his books. Rift War. I think it was the first Rift War book that he had written. And I mean, it was fine. I enjoyed it. I just didn't continue along. So Chris Burkhart says, L. Sprague de Camp. I think they're the author who extended or expanded on the mythos, of course, and August Derleth, as far as the Cthulhu mythos. Let's see. Daryl says David Gamel. I am not familiar with them. Sean O'Donnell says Mary Stewart's Merlin trilogy in the 70s. Were those 70s? I thought those were 80s. I could be wrong, but I thought the final book in that series came out in the 80s. It came out when I was in high school, because I seem to remember Elliot reading those when we were in high school. I think. Next up, an author that's probably going to be a bit derisive or divisive, I guess I should say, is Stephen R. Donaldson and the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. And yes, I'm sure there are folks out there who are like, oh no, seriously? You're recommending that, Jeff? Remember, I am aiming these authors and some of their series at Game Masters and Dungeon Masters. And that first trilogy of Thomas Covenant is fantastic. And it really does do new things with the genre. Now, yes, the main character, Thomas Covenant, being a leper and a whiny bitch. Yeah, okay. And thing two is he's not a hero. He's an anti-hero for the most part. And that was something relatively new, unique and new that we had seen only a few times before in popular fantasy up to that point. So I got to say, when I first picked up these books, now granted, back in the 80s, I was in high school. I mean, they absolutely blew me away. Now, I didn't really start reading fantasy until I was in high school. Prior to that, it was mainly science fiction. I don't really recall reading much fantasy. I would pick up science fiction all the time. And then I picked up The Hobbit when I was in 8th grade. In fact, if I remember correctly, I started reading Fellowship of the Ring first, and then had heard that, or maybe as I started reading it, I realized that there was another book before it. So I went and got The Hobbit. That was, if I remember right, I think that was the first time I read any fantasy. Flint Fireforge says, hated Thomas Covenant when they were 14, 15. He was such an unlikable character. Yes. As I said, he's such a whiny bitch. And he's very selfish early in the trilogy. Now, I think all in all, Stephen R. Donaldson has written 9 books about Thomas Covenant, I believe. And I do understand, too, that Stephen R. Donaldson is supposed to be kind of a pain in the ass as a person. But we try to separate the work from the author, too. Roger Prudhomme says their mom gave them The Hobbit when they were 12 in 1980 and can't thank her enough. Funny enough, I don't think a ton of people realize that The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were not popular when they were first published. It wasn't until, I want to say it was the late 60s, early 70s, that people started to get into The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Flint Fireforge also points out Jack L. Chalker and the Well of Souls series, another one that I think I read just the first book. The Madman says, I feel like I'm missing out on some really good books. All I read anymore are my RPG books, and I'm still way behind. You and me both, brother. Preaching to the choir on that. Sadly, I do not get to read as often as I once did for pleasure. I think that's a fact of life for any adult. But that's why I turn to audiobooks. So I listen to audiobooks when I go to sleep. A lot of times if I'm working on like doing news pieces for the show or writing, news pieces for the website, I will have an audiobook on, listening to that. That's how I get my non-game book work in. Vorpal Bite says, dude, the most popular password in history has to be, I'm assuming he meant to write Gandalf. Chris Burkett says, my first exposure was the Rankin Bass cassette tape with all his songs and Book of the Hobbit. Kathy Evans points out that she has read the Well of Souls books. Nice. Just like Fred Saberhagen. I could have thrown Fred Saberhagen on this with the Books of Swords, but I have not read them all. I only read the first 3, which I really liked. I'm not sure how well they would age, though. Kind of curious. All right, so we've focused on Stephen R. Donaldson enough. Next up, how can we talk fantasy literature and inspiring game masters and dungeon masters if we don't talk about Sir Terry Pratchett? How can we not talk about the late, great Sir Terry Pratchett and Discworld? How many books? 44? Was that what he ended up at? 44-ish? I will be the first to point out, I have not read many Discworld books. I think it's like 7. And it's important to keep in mind that early on, like the first 3 books or so, is more aimed at being more kind of tongue-in-cheek, satirical, kind of poking fun at fantasy. So early on in the first book, they encounter, I can't remember their names, but they're supposed to be Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, but they've got goofball names. It is after that where Discworld really takes off. There is a reason why the vast majority of Discworld books were huge bestsellers and just people adore them. Now, if you are looking at running a fantasy role-playing game that is a little more whimsical, Maybe has a little more humor. It's certainly not grimdark by any stretch. You have got to read Sir Terry Pratchett's work. There's no way getting around it. Now, I'm sure some people would be a little surprised. Hey, you didn't include Neil Gaiman in this list. Neil Gaiman doesn't really write a lot of fantasy, as we know fantasy for role-playing games. Like Sandman, it's fantastical, but Sandman is more urban horror than anything else. I think really the only truly fantasy novel that Neil Gaiman has written is Stardust, which I love, but there is a reason why Neil Gaiman is not on this list, although I love Neil Gaiman's work, and I say it all the time. He's one person I think would be just fascinating to be hanging out with, sitting having dinner, having a couple of drinks, because he just seems to be very knowledgeable about everything. Char Aznable is with us, says, recently read Thieves' World for the first time. Loved that first book. First few books of Thieves' World are fantastic. And then it starts falling into the problem with the shared universes, where the authors all start using other characters that other authors have created, and then they're trying to like one-up them. Thieves' World especially, I remember getting to that point. But there were some characters in Thieves' World I thought were just excellent characters. That was my first introduction to Andrew J. Offutt. There's an author probably almost nobody knows, but he had actually written some novels that were Cormac McArt, which I think is a character that Robert E. Howard did one or two stories about. So Char says, well, they only own the first four. That's probably what you want. Daryl says they tried Gaiman last fall, couldn't finish. He's probably an acquired taste for some folks, of course. All right, next up, already mentioned in chat, Robin Hobb. Robin Hobb in the Realm of the Elderlings series, which I think is now at 13 or 14. I think it's 13. Robin Hobb writes fantasy characters probably better than anyone else, in my opinion. So they are always well fleshed out. They have realistic wants and needs, and the villains aren't all twirling my mustache here. Highly recommend checking out Robin Hobb. Assassin's Apprentice, I think, is the first book in the Realm of the Elderlings series. Fantastic audiobook. I don't know if they've got the same narrator, voice artist, whatever you want to consider it, throughout. I don't even know if all 13, 14 books are in audiobook format, but I did listen to the first, and that was about 4 years ago, and thought it was really well done and kind of got me hooked on it. I'll be the first to point out, I have only read, I want to say the first three. Well, I have listened to audiobooks for the first three. I know some people get mad and it's like, you didn't read it, you listened to it. I get it. I understand. But at least listening to an audiobook is far, far better than not doing anything with a book. So there is that. But yes, I think Robin Hobb probably writes characters better than any current fantasy author that I'm really familiar with. 2 more to go. These are probably, in my opinion, the most influential fantasy authors for me. Kevin R. Smith says, first part of Assassin's Apprentice is so well written, especially little twist when you realize what's been going on with Fitz and the animals. Stephen from Roll for Combat is joining us. Says they believe it's 16 books. They are rereading the whole thing and just finished Mad Ship last night. Very nice. Very cool. Mateo is with us again. Says, I started as a kid with C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and then moved on to Raymond E. Feist and Crichton. The Magician would be a great base for an RPG if not already done. Then we've got somebody else who popped on into chat that I may have missed. Ah, there we go. Sure, of course. It's like, all right, Jeff, here we go. Mispronounced somebody's nickname here. Endahill and Endanesh. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard, Double E. Thank you very kindly. Okay, so Michael Moorcock. I absolutely love the Elric series. And I have read Corum, Hawkmoon, some of the other Eternal Champion tales that are out there. The original 6 books for Elric pretty much awakened my need for fantasy literature. And Elric is one of the first anti-heroes. Remember, we were talking anti-hero? And we didn't have a whole lot of anti-heroes in the world of fantasy. It was almost always the, either the freebooter like Conan, or kind of the lovable rogues, or just the do-gooder, as opposed to someone who kind of in a lot of ways, especially early on, doesn't really give a fuck outside of him and his love. And that's about it. And he doesn't really care about bringing his civilization down in the midst of it. Something else to keep in mind is the Elric books, as well as Corum, Hawkmoon, and others, established the law versus chaos, at least in my opinion, that we see so prevalent in fantasy role-playing games. Now, of course, yes, we are seeing lately a move away from having alignments, but there should still be a law versus chaos sort of feel where law is societal. Chaos is complete madness in some ways. So definitely Michael Moorcock, huge fan. I will say that there are, I think it's a trio now of audiobooks for the Elric series where they have incorporated the stories, the novels that have come out since. So those of you out there who have read the original 6 Elric books, and they clock in at, 180, maybe 200 pages? I mean, they were pretty short paperbacks released here in the U.S. In fact, for some reason, I think the company that made them was TAW? Just seems to be jumping out. And it was funny because I actually had to go pick up the Elric books at used bookstores because in the 80s, when we actually had a bunch of chains of bookstores, good luck finding Michael Moorcock. It was not easy to find Elric stories or Elric novels. But if you've read the first 6 books, there is a conclusion, right? It's not open-ended at the end of these 6 books. And then Moorcock started writing other novels with Elric that are supposed to take place, most of them, within the time frame of those 6 books. So they are included in the audiobooks. And I'll be the first to point out, I'm not super keen on some of the newer Elric books that had come out over the last 20, 25 years, because every once in a while, Moorcock will crank out another Elric book. So, Affordable Bite says they were buying the strategic review mostly for the Centerfold game. Yeah, a lot of those game magazines that would come with a game, which now we see like, yeah, from my buddy Mark H. Walker. And it's Flying Pig Games that does that. I don't think it's Tiny Battle Publishing. I think it's Flying Pig Games. Same thing. Reason why you pick it up is because of the game inside. Articles and that. Anyway, Michael Moorcock, highly, highly recommend. And there is a lot in fantasy role-playing games that have inspiration from the Elric stories, as well as Corum and Hawkmoon and others. My final author, I think some folks out there in chat are probably going to be able to guess. It is Fritz Leiber. Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories are, to me, the pinnacle of sword and sorcery short stories. They don't get much better on a whole than Fritz Leiber as far as fantasy stories go. Absolutely love Fafhrd, absolutely love the Grey Mouser, who originally is known as Mouse. I will say that the 4th book, I think it's the 4th, Swords Against Ice Magic. It's the only novel. I mean, and it's fine, but the Mouser's preference in women is a little creepy these days. So probably it was a little creepy back then. But one thing that Fritz Leiber does, for the most part, is he actually includes some pretty strong women. So when Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser encounter various different women, they don't tend to be taken advantage of, the women, by Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. There isn't that just misogyny that you'll find in some older fantasy. Or like, look at Robert E. Howard. Some of his stories, it's basically Conan meets some nude or barely dressed woman. He's protecting her, trying to save her. But in his mind, he's lusting for her. Now, I'm not saying that Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser aren't like that. But the women usually are the ones who get the best of them. So these stories actually have aged pretty well, and absolutely love them. There are audiobooks for it's 7 in total of the books. And the last book is kind of a novel too, but I think there are also a couple of stories, or maybe, what do they call them? A pastiche, where an author takes like the Martian Chronicles. They take different short stories and kind of string them together as a novel. I think it's a little bit like that. Bill N is with us in chat, says, looks like there's a 320-page omnibus Grey Mouser book. Thorp Bite says, the older I get, the more I enjoy misogyny in my fantasy games. As I pointed out in the past, it's your table. Yeah, knock yourselves out. Enjoy what you want. Roger Perdome says in the 80s, Lankmar was their city of choice for Dungeons and Dragons. Anyway, as I was saying, the audiobooks from Audible are excellent. The narration, top notch. Not as good as the Joe Abercrombie, but are really, really well done. Really like them a lot. All right, Chris Burkett and Bill N are rocking and rolling. No, I should say Chris Burkett is rocking out. Bill N just popped in. Hopefully I've said hello to everybody who's swung on into chat. Man says, never understood the appeal of Edgar Rice Burroughs. Every book I read progressed exactly the same way. After the first few books, I knew what would happen before it did. I don't understand anybody who would want to read Tarzan. The first Tarzan book is an absolute snore. It is a snore fest. And I don't think it gets much better. And it's not got a happy ending. Sort of like, what? Kevin R. Smith says there were official Lankmar products for AD&D. I almost used one of the cover pieces of art, but it did not fit well with the dimensions that I have to use for the thumbnails. Verbal Bite points out John Carter of Mars. Another book that I started to read, didn't get into. Sort of like, I'm one of these people where if it's like a series, if it doesn't grab me, I'm not going to continue. I'll finish the book. I do not take a book and start reading it and not finish it. I will on occasion do that with an audiobook. And with audiobooks, I always make sure I listen to the sample because there are some books that are just excellent books, but the voice talent they've got is just so wrong for it. So Carl Edward Wagner, or Wagner, I've heard people pronounce his name differently. His Kane series, I would love to check out because Kane is also another anti-hero. I've heard really good things about those books, but they're super difficult to get your hands on. And I'm not a big e-reader guy. I'll read game books on a tablet, but I'm not real big on reading books on a tablet. And I think it's because at least reading a game book, there's some artwork, there's things that kind of break up the monotony of just, which funny enough, a regular book is the same thing, but do not know. So discussion of the city state of the invincible overlord. But yes, Daryl, I would love to check out the Kane books. I'm kind of surprised that we haven't seen an series of audiobooks because Audible does a lot of, or I guess they are, I think they're Audible productions. They do a lot of shit. There's a lot of junk. There's a lot of lit RPG stuff. Don't even get me started on that. If you enjoy reading lit RPG stuff, that's fine. I'm like, man, I'd rather just watch paint dry. The man was pointing out, talking about Edgar Rice Burroughs and reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and being like, oh, yeah, I know it's coming now. That's kind of exactly what most lit RPG is. From what I hear, I gave it a try with a couple of books that people have recommended, and I thought, are you people out of your mind? All right, so that is a list of fantasy authors that I think all game masters, all dungeon masters, regardless of experience, regardless of the type of fantasy role-playing game you run, you should take a peek at a few of these. I think you will find a lot of inspiration to be had. And once again, there are tons and tons of authors who could have made this list. But got to keep in mind, I wanted to share authors that I am pretty intimately familiar with their work. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm just making a list of stuff that I don't know what this is. All righty. So do want to point out, I did share 3 reviews this past weekend or over the holiday weekend. And one of them is the latest Cult of RuneQuest, The Lunar Way. And then I also shared my review of Alien, the role-playing game, Building Better Worlds. And the reason why I wanted to mention these is because this and the next book I'm going to show you, I'm doing giveaways. So I have contests that I've shared in those reviews. So if you weren't aware of that, by all means, check them out. If you're interested in a copy in PDF, I'm giving away 2 copies of Building Better Worlds. I tell you how to get into the running in the video. If you follow the Gaming Gang, you kind of know what my contests normally are. Not too difficult to figure out. And then I also shared my review of Doctor Who, the role-playing game, 2nd edition, 60 Years of Adventure, books 1 and 2. I did 1 review for both books. And I am also giving away a couple of copies of both books to 2 lucky viewers. Once again, I explain how you can get into the running in the review, so keep that in mind. So Fleming Aaron says, you mean you aren't shilling for fantasy authors now? No, don't really do much shilling for anybody. All right, that is it for this time out. Another relatively long episode tonight. But if you like the video, by all means, give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when the Dispatch streams live, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings, right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. It'll also inform you when I share other videos, such as my aforementioned review of 60 Years of Adventure. But of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. If you watch live, thank you very much. If you watch live and took part in chat, bigger thank you, because you're not only keeping me company, you're keeping each other company while I ramble on about different things. But of course, I know a lot of folks out there, they don't have an opportunity to watch live. Doesn't matter if you're watching live or on Memorex. Really do appreciate all of you taking time out to watch any of these videos on the Gaming Gang channel. Everybody enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is in your neck of the woods. I will be back tomorrow. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and here's hoping all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.